Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I am so glad that you are here with us today. My guest today is a force. She is a change maker, an advocate who passionately works with schools in her community to develop programs that facilitate neurodiversity. And she is an incredible human being. My guest today is Toni-Ann Millen, and she believes that building trust, normalizing making mistakes, facilitating inclusion and belonging, and creating a safe space are the first steps to intervention for kids who think and learn differently. Toni-Ann has experience working as a special educator, special education coordinator, lecturer in special education, and education consultant. She has a private practice where she provides educational assessments to provide targeted, individualized learning programs for students with learning challenges and disabilities who need support in the general classroom. Toni-Ann is an absolute gift to the space. She is here today, and you're about to find out why she is so remarkable.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Toni-Ann, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I was so looking forward to this.
Me too. It's like we meet again. It seems like it's been months since we connected initially.
It probably has been a few, like probably about two, three.
Okay.
It really has been.
Yes. And thanks to LinkedIn for connecting us and for me becoming aware of the work that you're doing.
Yes, definitely. Right. These things are working well.
They are. And I'm so glad that you're here. I'm a huge fan of your work. Before you came on, I shared a little bit about your background with listeners, but I would love for you to tell them where you are doing the incredible work that you're doing. Where are you based?
Okay, so I'm based in Jamaica, right? So the nice warm Caribbean, which right now is just really hot. But yes, this is where all my work has been, all my experience and exposure has been as I've been growing in my field. And in the Caribbean, there is a lot of work yet to be done in many different aspects. We're still learning. We're still coming on. Even in the training of professionals, we don't have a wide array of options. And sometimes, updating our programs and just making people understand the truest potential of our children, despite what challenges may exist, and adjusting our education system and such to really just learn, because special education field is so dynamic. The information and the research comes at you pretty fast. And so to be effective in the field, you have a lot of keeping up and reading and conversations like these and connections to make to really be beneficial.
Absolutely. There's new research coming out all the time. And that's such a big part of what we do as professionals and as people who work with kids who think and learn differently, who struggle with learning and processing difficulties, is to keep up to date on, what the research is telling us is our best practices and evidence-based practices to support children and adolescents. And the work you do resonates with me for a number of different reasons, including where you do the work is because, as I think I was born in the Caribbean, in Grenada. I still have family there. It was my first home. My sister-in-law is Jamaican. And I think a year before the pandemic, we had a big extended vacation in Ocho Rios.
Which is just minutes from where I grew up.
You see? And I think my parents are going to be there in July. So I have, my heart for the Caribbean and everything that is happening there. And I think you and I both share this desire to ensure that children and adolescents who struggle with learning
struggle with difficulties have the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Yes, that is the overall focus. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know from doing this work, and as you know, that there are significant disparities in just access to reliable information and resources depending on where you are in the world. Like even within the US, I've had parents tell me that they moved to different states or different cities because they knew that they could get more support for their children somewhere else. How are you helping to facilitate this inclusive educational system that caters to the needs of all children?
Okay. So, where I'm from originally, because Jamaica has 14 parishes, right? Most people know about, well, if you're coming for the hotels, that's the North Coast. But the business section or the city of Kingston, the heart of that is Kingston and St. Andrew. So that's where you're going to have, that's like your New York City. That's like your, your Manhattans for your states. But when you hit the North Coast, if you are ever to visit these hotels and actually step outside, beyond the hotel walls, it's a completely different life. And these are the country areas, which are beautiful. But part of the beauty is there's not as much development. There are not as many schools. And one of the challenges with that is that currently, though we do have government support and it has improved over the years, the cost to attend these inclusive schools, they're usually private. And so business persons, from a business perspective, opening an inclusive school in some areas, you wouldn't be able to cover expenses. And so that simple thing is one of the reasons you don't have as many. However, we have had some pop up over the years, but cost is still a challenge. Sometimes we have one in, I think, McGrill, which is our more western point, and everybody know Rick's Cafe and this beautiful sunset and the 7 Mile Long Beach. But and they recently have one, and it's actually funded by organizations that are US based. So it is public. It's not a private school, but these are the type of situations that have to occur right now because of what's happening to allow greater access for children. And then another thing is awareness.
Yes. Tell me about that.
Yeah, some persons may not even understand why a child is not performing as they should. One of the things I reflected on growing up, I grew up in the country, as I said before. I went to public school, which we call primary schools. So they are much larger. In the country, they're not as big as how they can be in Kingston. Like in Kingston, you can have 50 kids in a class with one teacher.
Oh my.
Yes. So you can just imagine, based on our knowledge of neurodiversity, what that could be like. So in the country, growing up, it was not so bad at that time. Maybe I would have had probably 30 kids in my class, still big, but, and what you found growing up is that you had kids who were either bright or the word that was used back then, dunce. And it was just like, okay, let's figure out which category the kid falls in. And then we just know that that's all they can do. And so that approach at the time, because of a lack of knowledge, now that I'm older and I've seen some of my friends, I look back and I'm like, geez, you're struggling with ADHD. You are struggling with a specific learning disability. You are struggling with dyslexia, but nobody knew, And so we have many children in our system who are struggling through, and it's just been accepted by adults that they're just not as bright. Nobody's asking the questions. Nobody's saying, what do you need to support you? Nobody's recognizing intelligence outside of, it's like intelligence only exists if you have no hindrance. And so we have these brilliant children who are having difficulties. And so they're not making the grade and they're not getting additional attention because it's just like, oh, well, his father was like this. His uncle twice removed was like this. So him just not bright like him sister. Sorry to get into the colloquial,
Right.
but those are the comments teachers will make, and they're not coming from a bad place. They're coming from what they know. And so the awareness, I think, first is still a very, very huge factor in terms of how we look and perceive our children. Because if, as a teacher, I don't believe there's anything more you can do, it's very hard for that child to come out of that. They're going to do exactly what the limitation I applied to them.
Absolutely. And, as you're talking, and I'm thinking that this is not just the situation in Jamaica. This happens across the world, globally. This has been an issue. There are some places where there's greater awareness and greater understanding, but it's not that long ago, even in the United States or in Canada, that individuals would dismiss a child who was struggling in school as being slow, is what they would the term that they would use, or unable to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And as we become more aware of these learning differences, learning disabilities, learning disorders, and that we know how to provide support and treatment, then we can move forward. But there first I love what you said, because first there has to be an awareness that this is something that is separate from intelligence and separate from a child's ability to perform in a number of different areas. And what is needed is appropriate support.
Right. Definitely.
And I know that you met with the Prime Minister of Jamaica, did you not?
Yes. Yes, we had invited him for the other same thing as I was trying to say. It was to kind of bring an awareness of the abilities of these children. That there is beyond a diagnosis. A diagnosis is not, it's not you now saying, okay, we know for sure this child cannot. It is now you saying, okay, so now I know what the challenges are. These are the avenues that are available to me. These are the other aspects of this child I can explore, and what can I do to give this child their best chance and for them to reach whatever their full potential is. And so we invited the Prime Minister to my department that I was running at the time at Liberty Academy, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, inclusive schools in Jamaica. And it was for him to see these children, to see that they could ask you questions, that they're curious because they know you don't come here every day. So they have a few things to tell you, to see what goes into having a department, the teamwork. You have class teachers, you have paraprofessionals, and for him to see something functioning well enough, given the resources that we have. And to kind of just open his eyes into the fact that this should not just be in a private school. This needs to be replicated out there. The parents in other parishes that are more rural equally deserve this. This should not be something that can only, because one of the things I've always struggled with, and I tell parents all the time, tell organizations all the time, you don't open a special needs program or start a special needs program with no plan for parent support. Because it's not just about the kids. You're taking on a family, and parents are an integral part. They need to understand, they need to be included, they need to be empowered in terms of what they're doing. Because I cannot imagine knowing that my child needs something. It's not a want, it's a need, but I don't make enough money to give that to them. And that is what a lot of these parents are faced with. They cannot afford a private school fee and afford therapy. Or they can't just afford therapy, period. They can't afford to get their child assessed. Now, mark you, let me also point out at this junction that persons can get assessments done through the government free of cost. There is an institution that does that. However, you can just imagine the backlog. And so when persons go that route, a lot of times by the time I get the report in the past, I've not been getting those reports in a while, since COVID, but in the past, when I used to get those reports, so much time had passed that the validity of the report, I'm kind of trying to patch together, especially if intervention took place, I may be looking at a completely different child. So you have that challenge. So it's not that the government has done nothing. I don't want to give that impression. It's just that it's still a challenge. And so it is the parent who can afford to do it privately who has the advantage. The government has also facilitated paying to have children with special needs placed in these private schools if their parents cannot afford it. However, the other problem is there are not that many of us. So after a while, as you would imagine, we can't have overcrowded classrooms, and our children don't matriculate to a next class necessarily every year, depending on how you structure your program. So they can be with you a little longer. So then there's no space for the person who's on this everlasting waiting list. So those are the challenges. So the things exist, but they kind of need to be refined. We need more opportunities. We need more. So when the Prime Minister had visited, that was my goal, to kind of say, children of Jamaica deserve this, not just those who can pay at the time, which was in Jamaica, 95,000 a term. That is kind of difficult for an average family.
Right. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you've highlighted is that it sounds like you've been really instrumental in helping with the awareness, bringing the Prime Minister to see these kids, to see that they can communicate and share their experiences, and that with the right support, they have they can thrive. But there's so many pieces to this puzzle, right? There's awareness, there's understanding first that this is a learning disorder, this is dyslexia, this is ADHD, this is dysgraphia. And then, getting an assessment to validate that that's what it is that you're seeing. And again, it's just one piece, but it's an important piece. And then the next step is that you can't just have an assessment without a plan to address the difficulties that you've identified. That's the whole purpose of an assessment, which is kind of what I think I see you nodding. The listeners can't see you nodding, but that is one of the things that again is not only a Jamaican problem, that I've seen it in the US. I've talked to parents from different countries where they have the same issue, is that they get this report with these recommendations and there's not a plan in place to address the struggles their child is facing, or it addresses a piece of them, of the difficulties, but
right.
Not all. Yes.
Well, if they get a piece right now, I'd celebrate, to be very honest with you, because one of the things I have found was that the assessments came, and very often, because, all right, I sat in two places. I was running a special needs program for an established institution. And then on the other hand, I had a private practice, right? And so one of the things that I was finding was that persons I met in my private practice who were at other institutions that did not have a special ed coordinator or a special needs specialist of any sort, those reports went to the school, went in a file, and that was it. So now I picked up that was likely happening outside, because within my established organization, I realized I had to be the one making sure the teachers understood the reports. Because you can't I realized I couldn't just say, so this report has come in for John Brown, so please take a look at it. Because after a while, I realized teachers themselves didn't understand the reports, and it was overwhelming. So I had to go through and say, this is the recommendations. These are the things that are due to him, right? How you assess, how you teach, how you do, how the homework, the extra time, all of these things. This is what he is dealing with. So as a result, this is what you are not supposed to do. You had to kind of really tease through the report. And so with other persons, their reports sat down in a file and nobody read it. It was more like, let's find the part that says what he has. Oh, good, he has this, so it's not our fault he's not learning. And then it kind of ends up in a file and that's it. So that became another major issue, because after you spent all that money on that report, it didn't really amount to any help. All it did was qualify that your child has this particular difficulty, and everybody went about life as usual. And that happens a lot. I'm actually brave enough to say that happens a good 80% of the time.
And that's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking from someone who knows what appropriate intervention can do in terms of transforming a child's life. And as a professional in this field, what is needed. And it seems that if there are not enough resources to support independent schools or private school placement for kids who are struggling in school, that support should be integrated into primary schools with the appropriate learning specialists who can address the difficulties, because it's 1 in 5 children. And it's not just 1 in 5 children in the US or in Canada or in the UK. It's 1 in 5 children globally that struggles. And in some areas, it's even higher than that.
Right. So I recently met with a principal for an institution here in Kingston that is one of the very popular private schools, not for special needs, just popular private school. And I asked her that very same question. I said, what do you have in place to support children who are having difficulties? And I think when I asked the question at first, she found it a little weird because she knows I know they are not a school for special needs. But we also know that once you have any group of children together, you are going to have differences. And which is why I'm so passionate about the word neurodiversity, because that's what it is. We don't need to freak out and everything. We don't need to immediately say, okay, you have autism, let me pick you out to the group. You have this, let me pick you out to the group. Instead, what we need to do is understand that we have children and they're not, no matter how we try, going to learn the same way on the same day, right? And hit your goals that you have set in your lesson plan as you have planned them. No group of children are going to give that to you. And instead of trying to drag that one that is kind of challenging you by the collar, it makes sense to kind of just ask the question of, what do you need? And I think that's where we need to get to. Instead, I think for my country in particular, we need to move from simply, what do you have, to what do you need? We can work out what do you have later, whatever, but the first question should not be what do you have? It should be what do you need?
I think that is so powerful, because it really speaks to, we are ready to support you, regardless of where you're struggling. What do you need is so important. That should be the question that's asked. Now, do you work with other islands outside of Jamaica or other?
I personally have not worked. That is actually a goal of mine, because I love the Caribbean. I feel currently, economically, what has been happening is, from I studied, the financially good thing to have done after my studies and what many people did, which I do not blame them for, is to look for work outside, to go to the US or to go to other developed countries. I mean, for me, I'd just be excited because that they're far ahead. So, all the learning opportunities and such. But I have always had a passion for my country and just the diaspora, just where I'm at. And it would be just very hard for me to leave the work I see here.
Right.
To help those who are, yes, there are challenges in other countries, but they're further ahead. So working with other Caribbean countries is actually something I am passionate about, and it's one of my professional goals. I've not worked with them by myself per se. No, I can't recall any.
Mm-hmm. But that's a goal of yours.
It is a definite professional goal.
And it's needed. I think that anytime you're spreading awareness, understanding, and providing, solutions to educational systems that don't work for certain groups of kids, then you're helping everyone, right? You're helping teachers, address the difficulties that they're seeing. Once they know how they can help, then they have more empathy and a greater willingness to help. And so, I love what you're doing, because you are not only bringing information to, educators and to families who may not understand some of these struggles, but you're also providing a solution. So tell me about EduPhase.
Okay, so EduPhase was just born out of the desire to do more, to be able to help children without the restriction of school curriculums or the school infrastructure. Because when you're within schools, there's always, not everybody always has your vision or has your passion. And that's something that will be expected. And so sometimes you're limited in how far you can go. But if you have a private practice, you can decide where the ceiling is. And so I just really wanted to do some more for these children. And I wanted to reach out to children who are not at the institution that I was at. So I'd given everything there because, it was in keeping with what I believed in, inclusive education. Actually, currently, I'm working on building another small school to provide another inclusive education option for parents at the moment. So when I went into EduPhase, that was the purpose. It was for persons to be able to have access to help that they did not have at their own schools, and to kind of help parents advocate. Because one of the things I realized when I met with persons, because every now and again, a friend may put on somebody to me, Toni, can you help this parent? Can you, and I'd gladly do so. And I was always shocked at what they did not know was available to them. Like I said, our government is coming, they're getting there. But when you don't even know the little that we have, it makes it really bad. So I was meeting persons and they didn't know that they were entitled to their child being fairly assessed. They didn't know they could get an assessment done or the necessity of one. They did not know or understand. They were believing what teachers who were not aware of the challenges were telling them about their child, which sometimes was to blame because what I said to people, when children go to school, imagine going to school, being forced to go somewhere, not being able to keep up. Your best efforts don't achieve anything. People keep yelling at you and you have to do this for what seems as a child the rest of your life. How can you not expect some behavioral challenges? How can you not expect an attitude at some point? How can you really not expect a child to act out? And so people were focusing on the behaviors as negative. And so these children were being labeled as all manner of things. And so one of the things I always said to persons when they came to EduPhase was, the first month of me working with your child, you're not going to ask me anything academic, because my focus right now is trust and a safe environment. They need to understand that they can make mistakes, and I'm not frightened or angered by it. I will not ridicule them. They need to know that they can admit to their own mistakes and they can make an attempt to fix it. And if they don't get it, it's okay. We're going to go with it. All of that is very deliberate. So I am not going into extra lessons, train them, get rigorous and make sure that before we can do that, because children don't learn in places that they don't feel safe. So everything was my kids would lie down on the carpet to do their work. The point of it was, when they come here, even though it's still academics, they need to leave that fear outside. And so even when, for me, sometimes as a teacher, some moments are frustrating. My thing in it, because they're coming with baggage, right? So you're a teacher, they're going to try you. I would take a moment, I would take a breath, I'd say, Jesus, help me. But I could not allow, because it would ruin everything if I responded the way they would have expected me to. So, and I think teachers need to be that deliberate in their classrooms as well. You control this safe space and you guard it. If you want the best out of your kids, you can be the best teacher in terms of your execution. Fear hinders learning. Discomfort hinders learning. And you're going to get an underperformance when you don't take that into account, despite how much you put into it. So that was a major thing at EduPhase, was to work with these children who were not comfortable at school, was to empower these parents to know, look, you need to take out that assessment that they have in that place, and you need to show them you're entitled to this, that, and the other by law. You need to ensure that you get this. When the child gets tested, the child is supposed to get extra time, different room. Oh my goodness, when you have to fight for the reader, because you're not testing them in reading, you're testing them in content. Get them a reader so we know for a fact that they understand what is being asked of them, So that was the big thing. And I just wanted to extend that outside of where I worked. And that was the opportunity I had, as well as to go into some schools and the teacher training, which was another opportunity with some corporate entities that adopted small public schools, to work with the teachers to make them aware of who was in front of them, to look beyond the behavior and to see the child.
And, what you've described that you provide at EduPhase is the kind of experience we want for all of our children. We want them to be seen. I often say we want them to be seen and heard. We want them to feel safe. We want them to feel safe enough to try and safe enough to make mistakes and know, like you said, you're not going to be ridiculed because of it. And that making mistakes is part of the learning process.
Right.
And then also know that you're going to get support in the areas where you need it so that you'll be able to really demonstrate what it is that you know. And, I think we've also shared that, behavioral problems manifest often when kids have learning struggles that aren't identified. So they act out, like you described beautifully. And I think we've both also been concerned that coming out of a pandemic, that a lot of educators and even parents will attribute some of student challenges to pandemic related issues. Like he's not reading because, he didn't have good reading instruction during the pandemic.
Yes.
And I think we make a mistake when we do that, because we're going to miss a lot of kids who have dyslexia, who have another specific learning disorder. And we know that dyslexia is not a pandemic related issue. It's a distinct pattern of brain connectivity that is different in kids with dyslexia than it is in typical reading children. And I think we share that concern that those kids are going to be missed.
Yep, that is actually a very major concern. And as the pandemic roared on, as at home, so I wasn't as involved, but it's almost like I could hear the parents. I was just like, geez, this is going to be the issue, because now they have something. Because as a parent, you want to know that there is no challenge your child is experiencing, as unrealistic as that is. Because children face challenges, not just in learning, in life. But we would rather them not when we're faced with it. And so when you can hold on to an excuse like, oh, the instruction was poor, school disruption, even though as a professional, you're not just looking at them being behind, you're looking at the patterns, as you mentioned. And so we're actually able to distinguish. And so one of the things I know for a fact is that locally, the pandemic, for parents who are not there yet, because you have to work with your parents through sometimes. At the end of the day, they make the decisions for their children. But it's going to set a number of children back, because you're going to hear that we're catching up. And you and I both know that's not it. A child without any challenge in learning will catch up, and will catch up. Won't take too long per se, but some persons will 2-3 years from now be blaming COVID when the opportunity of intervention was there.
Mm-hmm. And that's my fear too, is that we're going to miss that opportunity to support kids who really need it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I love the work that you're doing. And that's why I feel so passionate about the work that we're doing, because we want to get reliable information into the hands of more parents, of more educators. We want to make sure that more kids get the support that they need, and help more people recognize that not only do many of the kids that we work with have areas of weakness, areas where they need support. But like I always say, they have areas of strength and talents that we need to nurture as well. But we have to first understand that they have diverse learning profiles, and we have to embrace that.
That is it. You recently launched a parent learning empowerment. Yes, I do follow. I do keep up.
You follow. I think that just came out like last week.
Yes, I saw it.
Yes. And that's one of the things that we want to do. So when you said, it's not only about supporting the children, we need to support the families and the parents. That is why we have made the decision to launch those parent groups, because oftentimes kids will get a diagnosis, will have an assessment done. And like you're saying, parents either will not read the report, feel overwhelmed by the report, and they'll get the support for their child, but then they need to know how to support their child moving forward. And they need continued education about what is going on with their child and how to support them at home, not only at school.
Exactly.
And so that's why we want to launch these virtual learning groups. And the great thing about them is that they are going to be virtual. So you'll be able to access the groups from anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world.
Right. Because when I saw it and I said, okay, so I really need to spread this, because this is something that parents need to understand. It's not just a teacher, this is your job, sort out my child, but they need to understand how to advocate, because advocating is extremely important in a country where the awareness is limited, because you cannot assume that because you have taken your child to a particular place, they will get everything they should. And so you need to be the one. Unfortunately, it is what it is, but it's your child, and you need to be able to say, I'm holding you accountable. And so this is what my child needs to get. This is the support we're supposed to have. What is happening, that kind of thing. I always tell my teachers, do not take this report lightly. It's not just a piece of paper. They hold you accountable to it. If you do not do this, you can professionally be in trouble. But we don't have that attitude out here. It's this year in February that our Disabilities Act was passed. This is 2022.
Oh, my goodness. My goodness.
So, and once it passes, it still takes some time.
It does.
For
it
persons
really does.
to understand what it means. How is it going to affect? Because and on top of it, it's a wide act, because it is affecting the fact that we build buildings without consideration of persons with disabilities, right? So it's wide. It's not just for schools, but teachers and other professionals need to also understand, where does it put you? What responsibility does it put in your hands? And what can a parent who is informed do if you are not compliant? So
right. And that's the advocacy piece. I just feel like you are doing remarkable work in really providing sustainable and robust solutions that benefit all types of learners. And I would love the opportunity to partner with you. And, I know that we can. And I think that the messaging has to be culturally relevant. And so I think having people from within a community connect with community members is so important. Anytime you are messaging or giving people information, even when it's validated by research, we want to make sure that we're going into communities and being sensitive to the culture of those communities. And that way we can really bring about change, which is what you're doing. You are working for change. What is your hope for Jamaica as it relates to neurodiversity?
The dream. What I really want is our teachers to understand, I think above all things, that neurodiversity, to lean towards neurodiversity versus special needs per se, to understand that the children who come into our class belong there, regardless of what we meet up against. I do understand that sometimes a program might not be suited for a child. And so we can go the route of having tried things to get greater professional help and to make referrals. I understand that. But I think above all things, I want us to see our children, welcome our children, and just ask, what do you need? And from there, after having done that, we make whatever other professional decisions need to be made. Currently, we're at the point of just identifying and picking out. We're still there. You need to go into special needs. You need to go in that class. You need to go over there. And I was not trained to teach special needs children, so this should not be my responsibility. That I feel right there, because that is the first point of contact. That is always the first time it comes up. The first time a parent hears that something might be wrong is going to be from that first teacher, right? And so if you don't feel the child belongs, or if you don't feel they should be here, I remember speaking to a parent who was so broken when she brought her child to school, and the child was probably 3-4 years old. They had a teacher now would have seen that, okay, there seems to be some signs of autism, but they didn't meet the child. They didn't allow the child in. She was forthcoming with the information to say that, her doctor thinks the child may have autism, but wants the child in a school setting first before they do a diagnosis. And the minute that came out of her mouth, they told her, you can't come here. And as a parent of a young child, when she said it, it hit differently, because I think I've heard it before. But to just think that I brought my child here with this level of trust, and I was forthcoming with the information because I am seeking help, and to get that, no, you can't come here. And so I think it starts with hurting parents, but children feel it after a while. So it sounds simple in terms of, it sounds like a simple thing, but teachers, you cannot change anything in the education system without teachers. And so if the mindset there is not that every child in my class belongs, I'll do all that I can. Like, if that's not your attitude, we're forever going to be struggling with the change, because you're just going to be creating a lot of casualties along the way. I meet them many teachers later, oftentimes, or a few teachers, and you're dealing with a child who's so damaged and wounded, and, and so I feel that for me, for Jamaica right now, there are many things Jamaica needs. But I think above all things, I'd want teachers to be trained in a way that they can meet diverse needs, and for us to focus on the fact that children are naturally diverse. Special needs has its place, and I'm not ruling it out. I'm a special educator, but I just feel it should not be your first response. And that is what I want us to do, to see children, welcome children, ask the question of support. And we will have our teams of special educators. We'll have our teams of psychologists. We'll have our teams of interventionists to provide at the different tiers as you go through the process. But let it not be, get this child assessed so that I can know for a fact the child doesn't belong in this class.
You are an absolute gift to Jamaica, and you're an absolute gift to this community, this ecosystem of parents and educators, professionals who support kids who learn and think differently. And I just want to thank you for the work that you do. And I am very excited about partnering with you in the future, very near future.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I really am looking forward to it. And I'm still a bit starstruck. I remember I told you I was at a family beach day when you contacted me, and I just happened to check my email, which is unusual. When I'm there, I was telling my husband, look who it is. This is the podcast I always listen to. So he was trying to be excited for me.
Well, I was now starstruck by you as well. And like I said, I cannot wait for the work that we're going to do together, because there's so much work that needs to be done.
There is. I'm really looking forward to it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I want to let you know that we have something very exciting coming up. We know that knowledge and support are essential to a child's overall well-being. That's why we do this podcast. But we at Child Nexus are planning to offer virtual learning groups for parents. These groups will meet virtually for 8 sessions, and all meetings will be recorded and housed in a virtual library so you can refer back. We're going to have group leaders that'll combine written content, videos, and activities to really help further parents' understanding of specific topics related to ADHD, dyslexia, language disorders, autism spectrum disorder, anxiety, depression. And we want other parents and caregivers in the groups to serve as an additional support system for group members. So topics for each session will include getting an assessment, making sense of reports, understanding the diagnosis, treatment and intervention options, to medicate or not to medicate, embracing the whole child, more than just a diagnosis, social and emotional factors that impact my child's learning, getting appropriate educational and emotional support for my child, how to advocate for my child, pushing against stigma of learning differences and mental health challenges, and finding your tribe. If this seems like it's something that would be interesting to you or to someone you know, please sign up for our newsletter and we will let you know when we launch. Go to childnexus.com and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.